Okay, hi y'all. That's a really hard act to follow. Can you guys hear me? Okay. All right, awesome. That's a really hard act to follow. But basically, I would just like you all to take a minute and think about what you were doing when you were 8 years old. What were you doing when you were 8 years old? I was going to school. I had soccer practice. Just take a moment to think about it. And what do you think it is that every 8-year-old deserves to have in their life? What's an education? Is it food? Is it a place to go home that's safe? And the reason I'm asking you these questions is because there's going to be a documentary screening tonight at 8 p.m. And there's a documentary called Invisible Children. And it talks about the situation in northern Uganda. And what's going on there is that there's a rebel army that kidnaps children between the ages of 5 and 13. And the girls are usually raped and the boys are forced to kill. And so imagine being 8 years old and being in that kind of situation where you're taken from your home and you're forced to do things that you didn't even imagine that you could do. And so there's going to be a screening for this movie tonight. It's called Invisible Children. You can also go to invisiblechildren.com to learn more. And the screening's tonight at 8 p.m., Seaver Hall 209. And actually the people who made the documentary are going to be on Oprah tonight, today at 4 p.m. if you're interested in learning more. Thank you for your time.
Okay, so we have a guest today, or guests today from UPenn, and now they know what we actually do here at Harvard. The speaker for today, whom I introduced in last lecture, is Dr. James Pawelski, and he is from the MAP program, which is the Masters in Applied Positive Psychology. Today he's going to talk to us about the application of this program to leadership. There's certainly a lot of overlap. Sometimes I bring ideas that match, and we certainly think it's an important topic to discuss. Dr. Pawelski is a philosopher, so the beginning will be philosophical. And I'm certainly very much looking forward to the presentation. In addition, those of you who are interested in the program, there are a few students from the program here in this room who are going to stay after. Also, James and Debbie are going to be, and some of the students as well, are going to be in William James Hall second floor cafeteria. So it's as you come off the elevator on your left, between 2:30 and 5 p.m. to answer any questions that you may have about this, the lecture, or anything else. So without further ado, thank you.
Thanks, Tal. Thank you so much, Tal. It's great to be with you guys today. As Tal said, I'm a philosopher. That means that I spend most of my time trying to figure out whether or not I exist. I think I do because a couple of you laughed. So please continue to laugh to help me remember that I do in fact exist today. Tal has been emphasizing to you that this is a course not just on leadership, but a course in leadership. And this is certainly something that a philosopher who's very important to this institution, William James, would have approved of. William James is someone who argued that it's very important not only to focus on intellectual learning, intellectual knowledge, but also to take that learning, take that knowledge to the experiential level. I'd like to talk about another topic today that William James would have approved of, namely positive psychology. But before I turn to that topic, I'd like to tell you a little bit about why I'm beginning with William James today. In part, it's because James is so important to this institution. James is so important, as you know, to the discipline of psychology, understanding psychology from a scientific standpoint. And William James was also very important in my own philosophical development. I wrote my dissertation on William James, and one of the things that really struck me about James was this emphasis both on intellectual learning, intellectual knowledge, and on the application to experience. 100 years ago today, William James was the president of the American Philosophical Association, and in his presidential address that year, he titled The Energies of Men, He argued that it's very important to try to understand optimal human functioning. He didn't use those words, but that's basically what he meant. He pointed out that we all have energies sleeping within us that are only typically brought out at times of great need. And he was interested in finding more out about these energies and how they can be tapped by us at various points in our lives. He lamented that 100 years ago, basically the people who were focusing in this area were the self-help people. Again, he didn't use that term, but it was the self-help people of 100 years ago. And James argued we really need to have a rigorous, empirical, scientific branch of psychology to study optimal human functioning. So, I think William James would certainly approve of positive psychology because I see positive psychology as being an answer to this call that James made 100 years ago. So, here's how I suggest we spend our time together today. I'd like to give you a philosophical introduction to positive psychology, then a bit of a psychological introduction, and finally we'll talk about the application of positive psychology to leadership, particularly in the areas of education, business, law, and medicine. So, I would like to begin with a very important philosophical question. Is the glass half full or half empty? How many of you would say, honestly, that you tend naturally to be half full types? Let me see your hands. Okay, great. How many of you would say, honestly, I tend to be a half empty type of person? Okay, great. Thank you for that honesty and bravery. Optimism in psychology can mean a number of things. It can mean focusing on good things. It can mean expecting good things in the future. It can also mean a particular explanatory style. Optimism in philosophy means something a little different. In fact, the term optimism was first coined in reference to the philosophical views of a particular thinker. Anybody guess who that would be? I'm sure you're all guessing in your minds the right answer. I'll channel that and say you're right. It is Leibniz. Leibniz is famous for having argued that this is the best of all possible worlds. That is to say, this world in which we live isn't necessarily perfect, but it's the best that could possibly be. If you think of it from the standpoint of politics, maybe this will help make the point clearer. Politicians often find themselves in a situation where they want to help people more. So they want to have more funding for social programming. So they want to make the world a better place. What they find, though, in order to get that money is they have to raise what? Taxes. And what happens when taxes go too high? There's not enough money around for everybody to do the social program. On the other hand, if you want to lower taxes, so it's kind of a give and take kind of balance here. And so if we think we're going to improve the world in one way, we may actually be making it worse in another way. So Leibniz argued his optimism is this world in which we find ourselves is the best of all the possible worlds there might be. Now, I should mention to you that there is a little-known alternative school of interpreting Leibniz. And according to this school, Leibniz was profoundly misunderstood. Actually, they argue that Leibniz gave this quotation, said these words as he was leaving his hairdresser's, and he actually said, "This is the best of all possible curls." Be that as it may, taking Leibniz's view now back to the glass half full or half empty, Leibniz wouldn't just say that the glass is half full. He would say what? The glass is as full as it could possibly get. You try putting more in that glass, and you're actually going to wind up emptying it out some. So for Leibniz, the glass is as full as it can get. Let's call this relative optimism, the best of all possible worlds. Contrasted with optimism is a man by the name of Schopenhauer, who is perhaps the most famous pessimist in philosophy. He's famous as having argued that this is the worst of all possible worlds. But bad hair days could have something to do with your philosophical view, I think. In any case, Schopenhauer's view was just the opposite of Leibniz's, and he argued that this world is as bad as it could possibly get. The world is so precariously balanced that if it got any worse, it would simply cease to exist as a world. So the glass is as empty as it can possibly get, and let's call this view relative pessimism. Some New Thought perspectives or Eastern views would argue that actually there's no such thing as evil. And you may say, well, this is a ridiculous view because I've certainly experienced evil in my own life. But these folks might say that in order to understand the true nature of evil, whether or not it exists, you have to understand the perspective shift. So let me ask you a question. Are there any of you here today who have experienced something in your life, when it happened, you knew it was evil? It was a bad thing, shouldn't have happened, it was terrible, awful, horrible. Yet now, looking back on that event, you're actually glad it happened? Anybody like that? Okay, so you folks may belong actually more to this view than you think. This view would say that there is a perspective shift needed to understand perhaps that the glass is completely full. So, given the picture I began with, how could we understand the glass as being completely full? It's completely full of water and air, right? So you say, well, that's not fair because, it's a perspective shift. The glass is completely full if you allow air as being something that can fill a glass. So on this view, let's call this absolute optimism, that really the things that seem to be happening to us, that seem to be bad, seem to be evil, really with the perspective shift, are seen as not being. When folks are in a state of severe depression, they may believe exactly the opposite, that there's actually no such thing as good. And I know sometimes college students around exam times have been known to believe this, but hopefully you're immune from that. On this view, the glass would be completely empty. And we might call this view absolute pessimism. So I've got a question for you. Who's right? Is the glass half full? Is it half empty? Is it as full as it can possibly be? As empty as it can possibly be? Is it completely full? Is it completely empty? Well, who cares? I mean, not to diss philosophers and people who care about worldviews and so forth, but when you encounter a glass in the cafeteria, when you encounter a glass in your dorm room, in your everyday life, do you sit back and say, I wonder if that glass is half full or half empty, or could Leibniz be right in spite of his weird hair? No, what you say is, it depends on the context. Sometimes you want to get more in the glass. If, for example, you're thirsty and it's only half full of water, you may say, how can I get more in this glass? If the glass is filled with your roommate's coffee left over from yesterday morning, you're probably going to want to dump out the glass and actually get less in the glass so that you can move forward and wash the glass and use it again. So I want to suggest that the traditional ways of understanding optimism and pessimism may not be enough. They tend to focus on an external, mere observation of the world. And I want to suggest, actually I want to follow William James in suggesting that there may be a third way of approaching a glass that may actually make a little more sense. So let's take a look at some etymological clues. As you know, optimism comes from the Latin optimus, meaning best, pessimism, pessimus, meaning worst. And in between these two views, we can talk about meliorism. Meliorism is a term from Latin melior, meaning better. So optimism is basically bestism, pessimism, worstism. Meliorism is the view that the world can actually be made better. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, it's the doctrine that the world or society may be improved and suffering alleviated through rightly directed human effort. William James observed that for optimists, the salvation of the world is inevitable. For pessimists, it's no way, totally impossible. Meliorism, James says, treats salvation as neither inevitable nor impossible. It treats it as a possibility, which becomes more and more of a probability the more numerous the actual conditions of salvation become. And these conditions, James argues, depend on us. So the more we work to try to change the situation of the world or the glass or any particular situation in our concrete experience that we encounter, the more we work to change that, the more we may be able to help make the world a better place. Okay. So far, so good? I'm starting to doubt my existence again. So far, so good? Beautiful. All right. Thank you. Hey, there we go. So let's move on then, building on this notion of meliorism, was actually introduced in 1877 by George Eliot, taken up by James and others. And I'd like to build on this notion of meliorism and suggest how we can develop it further in ways that I think will be helpful for us. So I want to suggest that actually meliorism doesn't just come in one flavor. There are actually two kinds of meliorism. Think about our example with the glass. We mentioned two different actions we might take. If something is in the glass we don't want, we can work to get less of what we don't want in the glass, or alternatively, we can work to get more of what we do want in the glass. So let's call the first kind of meliorism, when we're trying to get rid of something in the glass or in our lives, let's call it mitigative meliorism. And this meliorism is focused on getting less of what we don't want. For example, you've got appendicitis. It's important to focus on getting rid of the appendicitis. So what do? Go to a doctor, go see a surgeon, perhaps have an appendectomy. That's a very crucial way of making the world, at least your world, a better place. Let's contrast mitigative meliorism then with constructive meliorism, which focuses on getting more of what we do want. Let's say, for example, physical fitness. So if physical fitness is something that you want, it's important to go to the gym, eat well, sleep well, and increase that area of your life. These two approaches, I want to suggest, are different. So if you imagine somebody who has appendicitis and the desire to get physically fit, those are two different kinds of actions that need to be taken there. If you get your appendix taken out, that doesn't automatically make you physically fit. Go to the gym and work out, that doesn't automatically take care of your appendix problem, right? So they're different approaches. On the other hand, they're related approaches. So if you have your appendix taken out, once you get better, then you can go to the gym and get physically fit. Also, if you're physically fit when you go in for the surgery, you're likely to get better more quickly, to recover more quickly from the appendectomy. Okay, mitigative meliorism, constructive meliorism, two different approaches to making the world a better place. So here's my next question for you. Which is better? Which do you think would be a more powerful, more effective way of working in the world? To be a mitigative meliorist, where you're able to make the world better by getting rid of things that aren't good for us, aren't good for others, or to be a constructive meliorist, where you're able to go around the world doing things that actually increase what we actually want in the world. Okay, so you know by now that I'm a philosopher. One of the things philosophers do is they conduct thought experiments. You ready to conduct a thought experiment with me today? Beautiful. Okay, great. So, and you have to be a little bit playful on this one too, because I got a little bit carried away, but you'll forgive me, I hope. So, my question for you is, which would you choose? And here's the thought experiment. Imagine that you have been contacted and have been told, you are such an amazing human being, you are going to get the chance to become a superhero. A superhero. You're going to get to become a superhero. You have one choice to make, though, and that is, what color do you want your cape to be? This is a very important thing in the superhero world. So choose carefully. You can choose, on the one hand, to have a red cape. And the red cape means you are going to be a superhero of mitigative meliorism. Okay, that's going to be kind of tough for the TV show. Probably have to change the wording on that a little bit. But basically, you're going to have a red cape. You're going to be able to go around and put a stop to things that shouldn't be happening in the world. War, poverty, famine, all these kinds of things, injustice. You're going to be able to put a stop to these things. That's selection A. Or you could choose to have a green cape. And if you have a green cape, you get to be a constructive meliorist. That means you get to go around the world helping people to get more of what they want. Helping to grow strength, helping people to have peace in their lives, helping to have love, connection, growth, etc. So here's the question. You've got to choose. Which would you choose? Red cape people, let me see your hands. All right, lots of red cape people. Green cape people, let me see your hands. All right, it's about 50-50. Very interesting question. Well, the good news is we don't have to choose. So who cares, right? Very good. I know I exist now, and I know you exist too, so thank you for that. So we don't have to choose, and what I want to argue is that we really need to have a balanced meliorism. I think that's where we should aim to be. And, many situations, complex situations, probably are on a continuum. They may require both a mitigative approach and a constructive approach. Sometimes it may be important to maintain balance on this melioristic continuum. It may be important to shift more toward the red cape side. So John Dewey argues that when there are cases of propaganda, illegitimate power, what do the people in power want you to think? They want you to think that everything is going fine. This is great, the economy is surging, everything is... And maybe at that point we need to be skeptics and we need to say, hold on, I don't think that's right. Let's look for things that might be wrong and let's see what's really going on. So sometimes we may need to shift we may need to have a red shift, right, in our thinking. More often, though, I suspect that what we need to have to maintain balance is a green shift, moving toward constructive meliorism. It seems like many times it's just easier to find problems to focus on, to try to get rid of, than it is to find opportunities to try to take advantage of. So I want to just give you briefly two examples, one from politics and one from psychology. We'll spend a little more time, as you can guess, on the one from psychology. How many of you here have heard of the initiative to establish a Department of Peace? Some of you have? Okay, great. So Department of Peace is Dennis Kucinich, Walter Cronkite, and others are on board. They're actually bills before both houses of Congress right now to establish a Department of Peace. The idea is that there will be a cabinet-level Secretary of Peace to promote peace in our homes, in our nation, around the world. How many of you would like to be the Secretary of Peace? Wouldn't that be an interesting job to have? You wake up every day and you say, wow, how are we going to have more peace in the world today? Now, what we do have at the moment is a Defense Department. Until 1948, it was called the War Department, right? So in 1948, we went from having a War Department, now we have a Defense Department. And what happens when the Defense Department does its work? A lot of good things happen. There are also times when it seems like we wind up going backwards, right? So for example, in the war on terror, have you noticed that sometimes in this war, it seems like the more successful we are, the more unsuccessful we are. The more we wind up hunting down terrorists and getting rid of them, the more terrorists there are to be hunted down. So sometimes, I think in this case, politics is a good example, sometimes when we focus on trying to identify and eliminate problems, problems propagate. So wouldn't it be interesting on this political view to have a Secretary of Peace, to have a Department of Peace? Now this wouldn't mean that we could simply get rid of the Defense Department, but it might mean that the Defense Department would have less to do. And I think that would be one important step toward making the world a better place. Let's talk about psychology next. And mainstream psychology, as I'm sure you know, has to a large extent focused on the red cape side, on mitigative meliorism. How can we identify and cure, or at least treat, psychopathologies? Focuses on helping us get less of what we don't want. Is that an important thing? Is that a great way of helping to make the world a better place? Absolutely. It's very important. And positive psychology argues there's another side that must not be left out of account. This, I want to say, is the constructive side. It's focusing us on helping to get more of what we do want. So from this perspective, then, let me shift to a bit of a psychological introduction to positive psychology, keeping in mind that what I'm really wanting to do is to explore the ramifications of this mitigative versus constructive meliorism approach, or, if you will, the red cape versus the green cape thinking. How many of you, by the way, are in Tal's course on positive psychology or have taken it already? Let me see your hands. Okay, great. A lot of you have. How many of you would say, no, I haven't taken the course, but I've talked with friends who have. I feel like I know a lot about positive psychology at this point. Okay? Are there any of you who say, I really don't know what positive psychology is, and I don't know what the fuss is all about? Anybody like that? Okay, great. Good. Okay, so for some of you, what I'll talk about will be review. For others of you, maybe it will be an invitation to learn a little bit more about positive psychology. Positive psychology was spearheaded by Martin Seligman in 1998 when he was president of the American Psychological Association. In his address to the APA that year, he argued that psychology is basically half-baked, that it's done a great job of focusing on the identification and treatment of psychopathology and not such a great job at all on the identification and cultivation of strengths. Since that time, hundreds of researchers around the world have either aligned themselves in some way with positive psychology or begun shifting their research programs over toward a more positive psychology approach. There is a burgeoning literature on this. There are international conferences. One of the downsides of being in positive psychology is that you sometimes have to attend these international conferences. So a couple of years ago, I actually had to go to Italy for one. This summer, I have to go to Portugal. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about being involved in positive psychology. You may also know that education now, not just research, but also education in positive psychology is advancing. In fact, you may know that the largest course at Harvard this term is on positive psychology. You also now know, at least from Tal's introduction, that there is a master's program, the first degree program ever, now being offered in positive psychology. This is the first year of the program. It's offered at the University of Pennsylvania, where Martin Seligman has long been professor of psychology. And the degree is a one-year full-time degree. It's a professional degree. So the idea is to welcome persons who have their professional credentials, are working as lawyers or teachers or physicians, business people, life executive coaches, and so forth, to help them learn more about the theory and application of positive psychology so that they can go back to their careers, back to their professions, and help to augment the green cape thinking in those domains. It's again, as I mentioned, it's a one-year program. It's also, though, not just for people who already have their credentials. It's also for people who want to immerse themselves in positive psychology before they go on to get their professional credentials. So about a third of our students are recent college grads who are in the program before they want to go on and apply this. One other thing about the program, we offer it on a hybrid executive education model, which means that students come in from where they're living to Penn about once a month for 2 or 3 days of intense face-to-face on-site classes. And then we have distance learning modules in the intervening periods. So this allows professionals to continue to live where they're living, continue to work full-time with what they're doing, and apply what they're learning in their current positions while still coming to Penn. So we've got students come in every month from Florida, from California. We even have 2 students who commute in from Europe. That's a bit of a commute, but they do that. Our 2 Asian students actually moved to Philadelphia because I guess flying in from Malaysia every month might be a little bit far. So keep in mind that commute when you're walking across Harvard Yard next time. If you're interested in this program, we'll talk more about that tomorrow in positive psychology. Tal's positive psychology class will be giving a brief presentation more directly focused on that program. So continuing with an introduction to positive psychology, Seligman has written a book, Authentic Happiness, in which he argues that there are 3 different pathways to happiness. And the first pathway is the pleasant life. The pleasant life focuses on positive subjective experience. What is it like to be you on the inside? And one of the significant areas of research in this domain is being conducted by Barb Fredrickson. And Fredrickson argues that our typical understanding of emotions may not be accurate. Don't we typically think of positive emotions as being effects of hard work or effects of success? Sort of like the tail on the dog or the icing on the cake. If you work really hard, you succeed, then you feel good about something. And Fredrickson is suggesting, and her research supports the notion, that positive emotions actually may be causal. Not just effects of success, of life flourishing, but they may be important as causes for life flourishing. She has what she calls the broaden and build model, just a brief illustration of what she means by this. Imagine that you're in the cafeteria, you're going to the cafeteria to have lunch, and there are tables there. About half the tables have people sitting at them, people you don't know. The other half of the tables are empty. And let's say you walk into the cafeteria and today you are not doing well. You can't remember the last time you had a positive emotion, right? You walk in, where are you more likely to sit? With strangers or by yourself? By yourself, right? That's what I would do too, right? And so you stew and then you leave. And what happens though if this is a really nice day? You're feeling about the way the blue sky looks and things are looking up for you and you're excited and you walk in, and where would you sit then? You might sit with some people you don't know, right? Introduce yourself, talk with them. You might find out that the person you meet is actually an expert in computers, and you ask them about what they do, et cetera, and you go your way. So as you've gone into the cafeteria, your attention has been broad. You've begun to expand your social circle. And so next week, you may find that you have computer problems. And you may remember the person that you met, you networked with at the cafeteria when you were feeling good. You may call that person and potentially get some help. Or the other way around, you may be able to help that person with something they're working on. So positive emotions, even if they only last for 5 minutes, Fredrickson argues, can help us to broaden our perspective, broaden our attention, and build our resources. Build our social resources, our psychological resources, our intellectual resources. Now, positive emotions aren't just about feeling good hedonically right now in the moment, kicking up your heels, enjoy dancing a jig. In fact, one easy way of misunderstanding positive psychology is to equate positive psychology with a big gold smiley face, right? So Martin Seligman is not necessarily pleased when it seems like every time positive psychology is discussed in the press, they've got to put a smiley face there. That's a great way of misunderstanding what positive psychology is about. Yes, it's important to feel good. Yes, it's important at times to dance jigs, I suppose, if you're a good dancer, or if not, if you enjoy that. And it's also important to remember that positive emotions can be about the past. For example, gratitude and forgiveness. These may not be leaping for joy kinds of emotions. They can be about the present, mindfulness, savoring, being present and really enjoying a beautiful day like today, or the springtime flowers. Positive emotions can be about the future, hope and optimism, for example. So, the pleasant life, one pathway toward making our lives happier. A second possibility is the engaged life. And this life has to do with focusing on positive individual traits. I know that Tal has mentioned to you that leadership, as you are thinking about it this semester, has a lot to do with character development, right? The development of the leader, of the character of the leader. So this realm, the engaged life, I think is particularly apropos for this course and what you're doing here. Positive individual traits, positive character traits as well. So how many of you know about the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM? Okay, great. So here's an intervention for you that I would suggest. If any of you one day find yourself feeling too happy, go and get a copy of the DSM and just start leafing through it and reading all the ways in which the human mind can horribly mess up, right? That'll help to moderate your mood. Positive psychologists look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and this is, of course, a very important part of the red cape, mitigative psychology, treating and curing psychopathology. But they looked at the DSM and said, where's the good news? Where are the strengths? Where are the things that we want to cultivate? And so positive psychologists, Seligman and Chris Peterson is actually the researcher who's taken the lead on this, have published a complementary list to the DSM. It's called the Values in Action Classification of Strengths and Virtues, or the VIA. And what they did is they took a literature review, or maybe it would be better to call it a cultural review, looking at various cultures across time, across place, not just Western, Eastern, ancient, contemporary, and to try to find what virtues and what character strengths seem to be ubiquitously valued, seem to be pervasively valued across these various cultural domains. And what they've come up with is a list. Here is the VIA classification of character strengths, and you'll see that the orange items there, wisdom, courage, love, justice, temperance, and transcendence, they understand these as being, they call these the virtues. And then under these virtues, there are various strengths, various ways of instantiating that virtue. So if you look under courage, for example, the classical example of courage is what? It's bravery on the battlefield. And that certainly is an important example of courage. But there are other ways of being courageous as well. If you have authenticity at a difficult time, you stand up for what you truly believe in, it may not be fighting on the battlefield, but it takes a lot of courage. Furthermore, the hypothesis is that of these strengths, there are certain ones that you may be just naturally good at. And these would be your signature strengths. So, for example, one of the strengths there under love is kindness. How many of you know somebody who is just really kind? They're just really kind. I hope all of us know at least one person like that. And what happens when this person is taken advantage of? What do? They keep being kind, right? You say to them, look, you're being taken advantage of. And they say, well, you know, and they keep being kind because it's something that's just sort of right there and a part of them. It's a signature strength. Now, if you look under temperance, another one of the strengths is humility. Is there anybody here who has the strength of humility? Trick question. Very good. Nobody failed it. Excellent. Okay, well, one of my top strengths is not humor, as you now know. So I'll move right along. The hypothesis is also that if we identify what our signature strengths are, what we're naturally good at, and we do those more in our lives, we may experience more flow. You guys have heard of flow. Mike Csikszentmihalyi's work investigating what happens in those moments when we're completely immersed in an activity. For some of us, it may be playing a sport where you're just completely immersed in trying to figure out how to work with your team to get the ball down the field. For some of you, it may be in music as you're performing. For others, it may be in theater. Or it may be as you're writing a paper, you just kind of get lost in it and time stops and you're totally immersed in what's going on, totally focused. And so the hypothesis is that if we identify for kind people, when they're being kind, they may tend to go into a flow state. Okay, so we've talked about the pleasant life, the engaged life, now the meaningful life. The meaningful life is about positive institutions, things like democracy and those kinds of institutions, also institutions as in organizations. This is using your signature strengths in the service of something larger than yourself, like your community, your school, church, nation, or the world. Is it possible to increase our levels of happiness in these various lives? And by the way, Seligman doesn't want to set up a hierarchy between the pleasant life, the engaged life, and the meaningful life, but argues that they're each important in their own right, and that best of all, it is to have the full life, which is composed of all three. Is it possible to cultivate more happiness? If so, how might we do it? I'll just give you a couple of different examples quickly in the interest of time. 3 blessings exercise. This is a very complicated exercise, so please take notes carefully. When you, at night, before you go to bed, write down 3 good things that happened and why. Do that for a week. That's the 3 blessings exercise. What's interesting is that oftentimes, if you're like me, you're getting ready to go to bed, and what are you thinking about? 3 things that didn't go well. And why? Actually, more like 30 things that didn't go well, need to be done yet, why didn't I get them done today, et cetera, et cetera. So the 3 blessings exercise, actually quite simple. Gratitude visit. Think of somebody who has been a mentor to you, who has been kind to you, who's helped you in some way, and you've never actually adequately thanked that person. So you write a letter, not just dashing off a two-line email message, but you really take time to write a letter and polish it. And you call up that person and ideally meet with them face-to-face. You say, hey, are you available next Tuesday for lunch? You meet for lunch. You read that person the letter as a way of expressing to them specifically, concrete detail, what they've done for you and how that has helped you. If you try this exercise, I recommend taking Kleenexes along because sometimes it can be quite a moving experience. Identifying your signature strengths and using them in a new way is another way of course, attempting to increase engagement in the engaged life. Do these work? One of the things that positive psychology emphasizes is it's an empirical science. So we want to study to see what positive interventions work and which ones don't. So here's just a brief sample of some data collected by Seligman et al. And published last summer in American Psychologist. You see here a study where there is the placebo control of thinking about a childhood memory. And by the way, these participants were gathered from the web. You go to one of Seligman's websites. Are you interested in helping to test out certain positive interventions? Yes or no? Yes, then you are randomly assigned to one of these conditions. So memory, every day for a week, think about your childhood memories. So you can see that on the Steen Happiness Index, this is a measure of people's happiness, there is no change from pre to post, 1 week, 1 month, 6 months out. 3 blessings exercise, pre, post, 1 week, no change, but 1 month and 6 months out, people were significantly happier than the folks who were doing the placebo control. Gratitude. Post, look at this jump immediately afterward. There's this great jump in how the happiness people felt. It lasted for a week and a month, and then after 6 months, people were basically back to their baseline. Strengths. Identify your signature strengths and use them in a new way every day for a week. And notice that there's a bit of a lag time, but after 1 week, 1 month, 6 months out, the happiness continues to be there. So it's interesting to see that different positive interventions have different effects. And, of course, this is the beginning of this kind of research. We need to have an awful lot more of it. So positive psychology and leadership. How does this apply to what you're doing? And I'm just going to mention a couple of very brief things in the interest of time. But if we think about leadership, as, again, I mentioned that Tal has been talking with you about in terms of self-development, positive psychology, I think, can be very helpful for leaders in their own processes of self-development to cultivate subjective well-being, their strengths, and meaning and purpose. Leaders can also be helpful in helping others to cultivate those things. So other individuals or other persons in the organizations within which they're working. I once had a student whose leadership style you may be able to identify with. He was a student who happened to have been very successful, and so his leadership, his leadership authority basically came from the fact that he was the best at what he did. So among his peers, he's the best, right? And this kind of leadership style, you might think of it in terms of sports teams. Usually the sports captain is the person who's the most valuable player, right? So he was the best at what he did, so that meant he was the leader. This is a tough leadership style because that means that you have to be, if there's anything that needs to be done well, you're the one who has to do it. And he was kind of running himself ragged. So when he took a positive psychology course that I taught, over the course of the semester, he began to see that there may be other ways of thinking about leadership. Not just so much, I'm a leader because I'm the best, but rather, I'm a leader because I can help other people see what's best in them. And imagine now a leader of an organization where the focus is helping everyone to find their strengths and to be able to use them more along the way every day. So now I have a question for you. We've talked about this red cape versus green cape thinking, and I want you to just take about a minute just to begin to think about green cape thinking. Think about your particular career path. What is your intended career? Is it law? Is it medicine? Education? How can you apply positive psychology perspectives in your career? How can you apply green cape thinking in your career? More broadly, how can you use constructive meliorism or green cape thinking to transform your profession? And I encourage you to think about these questions later on in the day when you have more time. These are questions that our students in the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program are thinking about. And I just want to just very briefly tell you about some of their work as we finish up here. So, education. How many of you are considering a career in education? Let me see your hands. Okay, great. John Yeager has a Doctor of Education degree. He's one of our students. He's the Director of Character Excellence at the Culver Academies. He's been working on developing character education programs. That's one of the core missions of the Culver Academies. By the way, is there anybody here from Culver? Happen to be? I know some of their students come to Harvard. I didn't know if somebody might be in this class. So, how can we use positive psychology as a means of character education, character development? Typically, character development programs have been in the past sort of, here's the character or here's the virtue of the week, and memorize it and put it into a good effect in your lives. John is excited because positive psychology, a strengths-based approach to character development, allows him to work with his students to find out what their strengths are, to help enable them learn more about themselves and to have an asset-based approach. Positive psychology, I think, can also be incredibly important for education at the college level, thinking about philosophy. We've talked about constructive meliorism, literature, history, religious studies. What would happen if we thought about these various disciplines from a constructive meliorism perspective? Business. How many of you are thinking of a business career? Great. Giselle Nicholson is somebody who's a recent graduate. She's actually here today. And she is a full-time MAP student. She's very much interested in microfinance. You guys have heard of microfinance? Right? So folks in the developing world, poor laborers in the developing world have been thought of as very poor credit risks. They have no collateral. They can't pay high interest rates. But what happens if you actually give them microcredit? You actually loan them $100 so that they can build their own business, build their own company, have their own autonomy that they create. Turns out that this is an incredibly successful field, burgeoning field at this point. What happens to those folks psychologically, though? We may think that economic success automatically means psychological success, but that's not necessarily the case. You may know that in the United States, over the last 50 years, we've had increasing economic success, but our life satisfaction has remained basically flat. So Giselle is interested in studying what happens psychologically in these cases of microfinance. You've talked about appreciative inquiry. You've done some things with the Gallup organization as well. Law. Anybody here thinking of going into law? Great. Dave Sheeran is one of our students. He's the executive director of the Tennessee Commission of Continuing Legal Education and Specialization. And what he finds is that law school is depressing. And in fact, studies indicate that law school is depressing. Students start out basically like everybody else. After a year or two, after just a year actually, they tend to have lower subjective well-being scores. They tend to have lower life satisfaction scores, and they're more have higher anxiety and so forth. Sheeran is interested in trying to see how we can use green cape thinking not only at the level of law school, but also at the level of practicing lawyers as well. Medicine. Anybody here going into medicine? Excellent. Peter Minich is one of our students. He's the founder of the Center for Clinician Leadership, and he's working on using green cape thinking, training physicians to be leaders so that they can go into hospitals and not just get a sense of helplessness because of the HMOs being sort of in control, but how can we use positive psychology? How can we use the kinds of leadership skills you're learning here to train physicians? Okay. Just before I make my last point, just want to let you know about some more information. If you're interested in an introduction to positive psychology, I recommend Seligman's book. Here's how you can find more information about the Positive Psychology Center. If you want to take your signature strength survey, if you want to find out more about the Applied Positive Psychology program, I will be, as Tal mentioned, will be available. I am the Associate Director. Debbie Swick is here. Debbie is the Associate Director of Education at the Positive Psychology Center, and will be available in William James Hall this afternoon. Also, there are some MAP students here, some students from the program. If you want to get a student's perspective, would those students please stand quickly? These are students from the MAP program. If you'd like to talk with them, feel free to do so. Finally, if you'd like to email us with any questions about this, you want to tell me that I actually don't exist, that would be fine. You can email me here. Final piece of advice for you as you're leaving, remember, as you go out from Harvard to be leaders in your various domains, remember William James, remember that your job isn't just to make the decision, the judgment whether life is great, optimistic, or pessimistic, but it's your job to help make the world better. And you can do this not just by getting rid of things that you don't want, but by getting things, helping us to find more things that we do want. In short, Remember your green cape. Thank you very much.